Bonjour, hello, it's Jennifer, your French teacher in the south of France, and I have a lesson for you today about how to express time. So this is something that gives a lot of people problems in French and especially native English speakers. So what I'm talking about is like if you want to say something like, I've been living in this neighborhood for 5 years. Okay? Or I'm going to the grocery store for 30 minutes. For 30 minutes. Or we've been talking to each other for 5 minutes. Well, in English, we used for each time. But did you know that you can't use pour each time in French? So that's what this lesson is all about. So if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you about how you can get your free study guide to accompany this lesson. So voila, let's get started. So again, I told you this lesson is going to be about expressing amounts of time in French. And so to say for in French, we're going to use depuis, pour, and pendant. Now, I'm going to go ahead and talk about il y a in this lesson as well, because we use il y a to express amounts of time as well. So you might be saying, oh, Jennifer, il y a, I've seen that before. That means there is or there are. And that's true, and that will never change. But you'll see in this lesson how il y a can be used in a different way. So we'll start out by talking about depuis. Okay, so here's the deal. This is very, very, very different than the way we do it in English. When something begins at a specific time in the past and it continues into the present, in English we say something like, I have been, right? I've been at home for 5 minutes or something like that. But and that's a different tense in English, okay? So what gets people confused is that in English we say, I have been. We use a past participle. But look at how you do it in French. You use the present tense because the idea is that this event began in the past, but it's still happening right now. So you use depuis with the present tense. And the first example I have for you here is I have been living in France for 5 years. Now look how I translate that. J'habite, present tense, en France depuis 5 ans. Okay, I have another example for you here. I've been playing the guitar for 15 years. Je joue de la guitare depuis 15 ans. And some of my students really appreciate a literal translation. And if you don't, then just ignore it. But a very literal translation would be, I am playing the guitar since 15 years. Okay? Now, I don't know why those literal translations can sometimes be so helpful, but even though we wouldn't say something like that in English, if you can wrap your head around it, around what the literal translation is, then maybe it can help you remember how to say it in French. So that was depuis, and we're going to come back and look at it a little bit later. I have some more examples, but now I want to talk to you about pendant. Pendant. Okay, so pendant, you might know that it literally means during, but this is another way to express time. The way we would do it in English would be for. Something like, we will be in Italy for 2 weeks. Okay? So much easier in English, I think. But so here's the deal. It can be used with all tenses, so that's cool. And we're going to say in French, so here I'm using the futur simple. On sera en Italie pendant 2 semaines. Pendant 2 semaines. Now, you might be saying, why can't you use pour? There is a time when you can use pour, and I'm going to show it to you in just a minute. But just remember that most of the time, you're going to use pendant. So let's go back and look at that literal translation. I was on the phone for 10 minutes. J'étais au téléphone pendant 10 minutes. Literally, I was on the phone during 10 minutes. Okay? All right, now I'm going to show you right away another thing about pendant. It's used with the passé composé to indicate how long something lasted. Now, I told you right here, I said that you can use pendant with all tenses. Use it with the passé composé to indicate how long something lasted. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because I want you to be really careful not to use depuis with the passé composé. Let's just talk about that again for a minute. When you're using depuis, you always have to use the present tense. And that can get confusing, again, because in English, I have been doing something for a certain amount of time. But just remember, it's continuous. That means you're still doing it. Okay? So if you're going to use the passé composé, you need to use pendant. All right, let's look at the example. We waited for you for 30 minutes. Nous t'avons attendu pendant 30 minutes. He watched TV for 2 hours. So this is something that started at some time in the past, but remember your passé composé rules. Passé composé says it started, it had a definite beginning point, and it ended. So this guy was watching TV for 2 hours. He started, now it's over with. Il a regardé la télé pendant 2 heures. Literally, he watched TV during 2 hours. Okay, so now I told you a little while ago there are certain situations where you can use pour when you're expressing time. And you're probably just going to wish this didn't even exist and that you could use pendant all the time, because here's another little exception in French. But remember, I have a study guide for you. All of these rules are written down on it. So let's see about pour. So we all know that pour can be used in so many different ways in French, but what we're talking about right now here is using it to express an amount of time. So you can use the verbs partir and aller with pour. Now you can only do this in the present or future tenses. If you want to use these verbs in the past, you need to use pendant. Okay? So I know that that's just a really complicated thing to try to remember, but this is only for 2 verbs, so at least you can remember that. Let's look at these examples. We are going on vacation for 2 days, and I chose this example on purpose because you see the translation, on part en vacances pour 2 jours. In English, we say we go on vacation. In French, we leave on vacation. And notice that vacances is always plural. So if you didn't know that, start using that. Instead of using aller en vacances, we say partir en vacances. Okay? So present tense, on part en vacances pour 2 jours. Future tense, on partira en vacances pour 2 jours. Très bien. Now, past tense, on est parti en vacances pendant 2 jours. You see how I switched? When I went to the past tense, I switched to pendant. Here's another example. We will go to the museum for a few hours. Nous irons, future, nous irons au musée pour quelques heures. Literal translation, we will go to the museum for some hours. Now, I wrote the word some there. In English, first I said we'll go to the museum for a few hours, but some of my students have a little trouble remembering how to say few, but they're very used to using the word quelque to mean some. So maybe this will help you remember that you say it the same way. D'accord? All right. So now the next thing I'm going to talk to you about does not mean for. So we're done with the for expressing time for now, but I have examples for you coming up. I just want to show you il y a. Okay, remember I mentioned that at the very beginning of the lesson. Here's what I'm talking about. You can use il y a to express time. It still means there is or there are, but it also means ago. All right, so here we're talking about the amount of time passed between a completed action and the moment you're speaking. Gosh, that sounds complicated. Let's look at the example. I talked to my aunt a few days ago. So il y a means ago. Look where it goes in the sentence. J'ai parlé à ma tante il y a quelques jours. This is always going to be in the past, right? Il y a quelques jours. Remember what quelques means? A few or some. Here's another example. I was in the kitchen a few minutes ago. J'étais dans la cuisine il y a quelques minutes. And your literal translation, I was in the kitchen some minutes ago. So now you have all of your rules. Now, it probably would be helpful to see some more examples. So I have a series of examples that I think you'll appreciate when you see how I've put them together for you. So the reason I said I think you'll appreciate how I've put them together for you is I've basically used the same sort of sentence talking about Switzerland and 3 weeks, but I've used it in some very different situations. Like the first one, I have been in Switzerland for 3 weeks. Je suis en Suisse depuis 3 semaines. Now I want you to look down here. Depuis, right? Right here. Depuis. That means I'm still there. I'm still in Switzerland. So I'm going to use the present tense. I am going to Switzerland for 3 weeks. I'm using the verb aller. Je vais en Suisse pour 3 semaines. So again, look down at the bottom. Pour, I'm using the verb aller. And here I'm in the present tense. I could have also used the future tense. I always went to Switzerland for 3 weeks. J'allais toujours en Suisse pendant 3 semaines. Also, now I've switched because I'm in the past tense. Here I've chosen to use the imperfect tense. But since I've switched to the past, I've also switched to pendant. And I was in Switzerland 3 weeks ago. J'étais en Suisse il y a 3 semaines. So there I've just used the imperfect tense. Now let me give you another set of examples. It has been raining for 2 days. Il pleut depuis 2 jours. Look down at the bottom. Depuis, it is still raining. So I'm in the present tense. Now, I can't give you an example using pour. Why? Because pour can't be used with pleuvoir. Well, why can't pour be used with pouvoir? Do you remember? Because there are only 2 verbs that you can use to express an amount of time with pour. And you remember what they are. Aller and partir. So that's why for this one, I don't have an example for pour. But it rained for 2 days. Now this is a completed action. It's not still going on. We're using the passé composé. Il a plu pendant 2 jours. And it rained 2 days ago. Il a plu il y a 2 jours. Now here I've chosen to use the passé composé. I could have used any past tense, okay? Remember that you also with pendant you can use any tense. D'accord? A few more examples. I've been at the park for half an hour. Je suis au parc depuis une demi-heure. Je suis au parc depuis une demi-heure. Remember your translation, the literal translation means I am in the park since half an hour. So the word depuis means since when you're expressing an amount of time. There's another way to say since, but it does not express an amount of time. Do you know what the other way is? It's puisque. Puisque. P-U-I, well, shoot, I don't have it written down. P-U-I-S-Q-U-E. Yes, puisque. And that's when you want to say something like, well, since it's cold outside, I'm going to put on a coat. All right? So if you ever look up the word since, you'll find puisque and depuis. Here we're talking about amounts of time. Let's get back to the examples. I will go to the park for half an hour. J'irai au parc pour une demi-heure. Here I'm using the future tense of which verb? Aller. So that's why I can use pour. I went to the park for half an hour. This is a completed action. It had a beginning and an ending, so I'm going to use the passé composé. Je suis allé au parc pendant une demi-heure. And I was at the park half an hour ago. J'étais au parc il y a une demi-heure. Vous voyez? So, depuis, I'm still at the park. Pour, I can do this. This is legal because I'm using the verb aller. And remember that we can use aller and partir in the present and future tenses with pour. Pendant, here I've used the passé composé as well as with il y a. Okay, I just have 2 more sets of examples to show you. He's been going to France every summer for 3 years. Il part en France tous les étés depuis 3 ans. Present tense. He will go to France for 3 years. Il partira en France pour 3 ans. I'm using the verb partir in the future. Now, look at the translation in English. He will go. And in French, I've used the verb partir. D'accord? But remember what I told you about vacances. When you're going somewhere and it's kind of like on a trip of any kind, even if you're going there for work, it's not vacation, you're going on a trip, a voyage of some kind. In French, we're going to use the verb partir, even if it gets translated with aller. And it is important because it sounds funny in French if you use the verb aller when you're going on a trip. So try to remember that even though I'm leaving on a trip, sounds kind of strange in English. Back to the examples. So he will go to France for 3 years. Il partira en France pour 3 ans. He always went to France for 3 years at a time. That sounds like a really stupid sentence. You guys don't have any idea how long it took me to come up with this example, you know. But I did it. We've got our past tense. I've chosen to use the imperfect tense so that I could give you an example using pendant with the verb partir and still sticking with France in 3 years. So, il partait toujours en France pendant 3 ans à la fois. It should say à la fois. Okay? I made a typo there. À la fois. It means at a time. D'accord? He went to France 3 years ago. Il est parti en France il y a 3 ans. D'accord? And my last set of examples. The baby has been crying for an hour. The baby is still crying, present tense. Le bébé pleure depuis 1 heure. Pour can't be used with pleurer. The baby cried, completed action, passé composé. Le bébé a pleuré pendant 1 heure. And the baby was crying an hour ago, was crying, so now I'm using the imperfect tense. Le bébé pleurait il y a 1 heure. So I hope that this lesson has made things a little bit clearer for you. I know that it's not easy, but once you know the rules, it always makes it a little bit better. Okay, so don't forget that you're using partir and aller with pour, but only in the present and future tenses. So remember in the beginning of the lesson, I told you that I had a free study guide for you, and I do. So I don't always offer these for free, but for this lesson, I would like to, because I want you to have a chance to have all of these rules and examples. It's a 2-page study guide that you can just print out recto verso on the front and back, and have this as a handy guide, because this is really something that gives people trouble. So how do you get your study guide? Well, all you have to do is go over to my Patreon page and look down in the video description, and you can see that link. And it is there for you. You don't have to do anything to get it. All you have to do is click on it and download it, and it will be yours. And so that's what it looks like. Page 1 and page 2 with all of the lesson highlights and the examples from this lesson. And I've also given you 4 little tips that weren't necessarily mentioned in the lesson. So make sure you go over there and grab that. And I will be back next week with another lesson. Please let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for future lessons. Merci et à très bientôt. Allez, ciao.